the food. Today, we are going to be doing a very basic pan sear, pan fry, whatever you want to call it. What I mean is putting seafood on a pan and getting a really nice crispy crust. So for a fillet, that'll be a crispy skin. Skin on is the most dramatic way to pan sear fish. You can pan sear any fish. You can do halibut, rockfish, but using a skin on fillet, it'll just be nice and crispy and golden. So we're also going to be pan searing scallops, which I think is really the only way anyone should ever eat scallops if they're really, really good. I will contradict myself because I've had broiled scallops before and that were great, but personally, pan seared I think is the best way to bring them to their full potential. So all we're using is a hot pan, a little salt and pepper, and some fat to sear it in. That's it. And of course, when you're using wild caught seafood from Alaska, weathervane scallops, today we're going to be using wild coho. That's pretty much all you need. It's going to be super delicious. You of course can build upon that, but this is just like a basic building block that you'll be really happy eating just on its own. Almost don't even need salt and pepper, honestly, but I can't help seasoning things. So the things that we're cooking today, one of them is something that you probably get in your curated box every month. Coho salmon is part of our base box, but the weathervane scallops are a member special. We'll drop a link for that into the chat as well. A lot of links that we're piling up here, but they're one of the most popular member specials that we have. They are super sweet, a little buttery, just a natural flavor. They are dry packed. I don't know if you've ever heard that term, but dry packed means that they are natural, not treated with any chemicals. They're frozen right on the boats shortly after harvest, which keeps them super fresh and delicious. So the chemical additives that I'm talking about, I won't delve too much into them today, but I do think that they're worth mentioning. They're pretty commonly used at, like if you find a cheap scallop, it's probably too good to be true. There's something called sodium tripolyphosphate that's commonly used on shellfish like shrimp or scallops. It's basically used to make shellfish look glossier, look a little more plump, so that it's superficially maybe more appealing to a consumer who's just walking by. But this adds water weight to the shellfish, whether we're talking about scallops or shrimp, and that can make it really hard to get a good sear. Water is the enemy of searing anything. So sodium tripolyphosphate also tends to leave behind a rubbery texture. So if you've ever had a rubbery scallop before, or rubbery shrimp, it was probably treated with this additive, or maybe someone just totally overcooked it. But that's something that these scallops do not have. They're all natural, just frozen, that's it. So they'll sear up really beautifully if you do it right. The scallops that we have are, let me just show you what we got here if you want to switch over to the other camera. Some of you have probably had the weathervane scallops before because, like I said, they're super, super popular. Sanana, can you switch cameras for me, please? Well, in the meantime, I will show you. There we go. Haha. They're super plump. They're relatively big. They're actually the largest species of scallop in, I believe, the world. They're sometimes called giant Pacific scallops. Every scallop is a different size though, so it just depends on how we're sorting them and what the harvest is. But generally you can expect them to be about this size if you see it in my palm. Sometimes a little bit smaller, but nice and plump, just really, really awesome. They come in a pack of, there's like a 20-ounce pack that these come in, which might seem like a lot. And it may be a lot depending on if you're just wanting to have a few of these as an appetizer, but I'm not going to show you how to defrost these today, but basically what you would just do is take them out of the pack while they're frozen, put them in the fridge, put them on a plate, and once they're partially thawed, you can kind of break apart as many scallops as you like. They're sturdy enough so you don't have to be very precious with them, but whatever is partially thawed, you can put right back into the freezer, wrap it up, put it in something that protects it from the cold, and then the rest of them you can cook. So that's how you can cook part of a 20-ounce pack and not the whole thing. This is not the whole thing. I have some in the fridge, but 20 ounces is supposedly a good 5 serving size, but sometimes it's more like 2 servings because these are really good. I was talking to a coworker who said she splits a pack of these with her mom when she makes them. So I feel like for me, it's like 3 servings a pack. Anyway, you will see if you get some of these. I definitely recommend trying them if you've never had weathervane scallops. But if you end up getting a pack of these today, you will see how much you actually want to eat, and it might be all of them. All right, now to the cooking. The biggest challenge that most people have with scallops is they can't get the scallops to sear like they do in a restaurant. What I want to show you right now is a completely optional prep step that I learned from the internet. It's one of Jay Kenji's hacks for cooking scallops at home to help you get a really good sear on the stovetop. I don't do this every time. I don't find that it's 100% necessary, but since we have time, I'm just going to do it. What happens when you're cooking scallops? They're super juicy just naturally. They end up expelling a lot of moisture. So if you've ever seared scallops, you'll notice a lot of like watery stuff coming out of them in the pan. So one way to work around this is make sure that you're not crowding the pan. Another thing you can do is pre-salt them. So salt does pull moisture to the surface of fish, scallops, anything. And this, let me flip these over too. Doing a little pre-salting step will get the moisture sort of like away from the surface. We'll blot these dry again in about 10 minutes or so. But I found that this kind of makes it a little bit more foolproof. Like I said, I don't do this every time, but especially if you don't have a super hot stovetop, if your burner is a little, a little sad, then you won't be able to get the pan hot enough for the moisture coming out of this to evaporate. I know that's a lot of things, but what we're trying to avoid is too much moisture pooling up in the pan. If your pan's not hot enough because your oven doesn't get hot enough, then this will sort of like mitigate some of that. So I'm just going to set these aside for, however long it takes me to get to them today. This is not on the recipe that we have up on the blog. Like I said, it's totally optional. If you have time, try it, might help. So those are off to the side right now. What we are going to, we'll go back to cooking them. What we're going to do now is cook some salmon. So the biggest challenge with searing fish, I think for many people, is that the fish or the skin sticks to the pan. Maybe the fish just doesn't get, or the skin doesn't get crispy enough. These are both very, very easy things to fix. So I didn't mention it with the scallops, but you might have noticed that these I had, or my seafood I have on some clean tea towels. This is just pulling any of the excess moisture from the surface of the fish. I don't even need to pat them dry if I defrost them like this, but nice and dry surface of the skin and of the other side. This will help get the fish super crispy when you're cooking it. Do not skip this step for any fillet. So that's step one. If you've been skipping that, that might be one of the major fixes for you. I'm going to grab my skillet here and just get this preheated while I talk. Let's see. Here we go. So there are many methods with that I've seen online and cookbooks for searing salmon, but I really like to keep things super simple, especially because we're already, having to defrost the fish overnight or having to defrost the fish right before cooking it. That's like one step. I don't want to have to do like multiple things to get the fish ready for the pan. So all I'm doing, patting the fish dry, heating up a pan, adding in some oil, and then we're going to, we'll get there when we get there. This is just I'm gonna let this get a little hot, but I'm using today a cast iron enamel coated pan, just because it happens to work on my induction burner. I'm not doing this with a hood over me, so it might get a little smoky later, but if I'm doing this on my gas stove, I usually just use stainless steel, but you can use cast iron. I would recommend against using a nonstick pan because that can inhibit the sear. It doesn't, because of some, I don't know, something prevents the skin from bonding to the pan, and that just makes it not as crispy. Yeah, anyway, I'm sure I could look up the science later, but don't do it unless you really have to. Wild salmon is also very lean. So today we're using coho. You might recognize a very silvery skin. If you ever look at the skin and compare sockeye and coho, they just look a little different. It's a nice thing to notice if you're cooking fish at home a lot. But this is super lean compared to something like farmed salmon. So all of the, not all of the fats, but a lot of the fats are stored in the skin. And it will, this is what's going to help it crisp up. It may not get as crispy as something like sablefish, which is super fatty, because there's so much more fat stored in the skin and you have more time to sear it. But if you're patient enough, you can still get crispy skin with something like coho or sockeye. So enough talking. I feel like I'm rambling on here. But what I'm going to do is, instead of using oil today, just because I got some clarified butter at the store earlier for the scallops, curious how many of you have used clarified butter. I'm going to add this to the pan. Essentially what this is, you don't want to be cooking with butter. There are milk solids in there that burn, but clarified butter is the fat from butter without those milk solids. And it has a really high smoke point. It's great for cooking over high heat with scallops. When I'm cooking fish, I do more of like a medium high, and that seems to be sufficient. If I'm using oil, I'll use grapeseed oil or peanut oil sometimes. So this is going to heat up pretty quickly because it's an induction burner. So I'm going to put this right into the pan. Oh, let me season it first, because we're just gonna not forget to do that. I'm gonna put this in skin side down after I grab my fish spatula. It's a very important thing to have because it'll be essential for you to hear sizzling when you put the fish into the pan, and then hold the fish against the pan for about 15 seconds. This is going to prevent the skin from curling, or the fillet from curling away from the surface of the pan. That tends to happen with skin on fish, or actually any fillet, but it'll prevent the skin from getting crispy because it'll be all convex, warped. This is going to keep it really nice and flat. So hopefully you can see through the smoke here. It's not so bad here, but this would be a good time to turn on the hood if you have one right over you. So that I'm just going to leave this now for about 3 minutes or so. What I'm actually going to be doing is letting it do its thing. If I were to try moving this now, the fillet would stick to the pan. It would start like getting ripped up. Once the fish is ready to flip, you'll see that it's super easy to flip because the fish releases itself from the pan. That sear creates like a really solid crust that separates it from the metal, so, or the enamel in this case. So I don't usually put a timer on. I kind of just look around the sides of the fillet to see how done it is. The doneness will start to creep up along the edges. Maybe when it's like about a third of the way up, that's when I'll flip it. Try not to rush this because what you want is as much time as possible on the skin side to get that crisp. I'm gonna move some oil around here. My pan doesn't seem to be really flat. Actually, let me add some more here. Right. So this is just like a super fast way to cook fish. I love having salmon this way, probably my go-to method. And it's easy when it's 1 or 2 fillets. When you have 3 or 4 fillets going and you have to be pushing down on all of the different fillets, it gets a little more tricky, and you just have to do it in stages and keep, the fish warm while you're doing another batch. But because I'm usually either cooking for myself or my partner, 1 or 2 fillets super easy to sear. So keep this going. Anyone have any questions right now?
Yes, Kat, there were a couple. One of them was, how would you air fry this instead?
How would I air fry this? This is for another day, but I can't remember if I've air fried salmon for an event before, but I find that with sockeye or coho, I just do olive oil or a neutral oil, coat the salmon after I've had it dry, of course. You must pat the fish dry. And then I pop it into an air fryer that's been preheated at the highest setting, which I think on mine is 400 degrees, maybe 400 or 390. And then 6 minutes later, it's done. That's it. Super easy.
That's amazing. Then somebody's asking if you salt both sides of the salmon.
I do salt both sides of the salmon. It kind of just bounces off the skin side though. I don't even know why I try salting the other side. It doesn't stick very well, but I don't find that that's, you know, prevented me from trying still. What you can do later, especially if you have like a nice fancy salt, when you flip the fish and serve it. First of all, I love serving fish skin side up. And you can always sprinkle on some like fancy flaky salt. That's like a finishing salt. Anyway. Any other questions? No.
Yeah, and then the last one was just if you could use another pan, or it has to be this kind of pan.
So cast iron, enamel, stainless steel, those are the three that I would recommend. Carbon steel pans are good too. All right, it's about time to flip this. I don't mean to cut myself off, but I see around the edges here, this is starting to look pretty done. And the way to check if it's ready to flip, I have zero resistance from the spatula as I'm, lifting the fish. So there we are. Super crispy skin, kind of got that like bubbly look. I'm gonna lower my pan to like a more moderate heat, maybe like medium. I still haven't quite figured out what medium is on this induction burner, so hopefully I'm guessing correctly. I only use it for events here. And I'm only gonna cook this maybe for another minute or so. Whatever depends on the thickness of the fillet. If I have something that's a really chunky fillet of salmon, I'll leave it in the pan for another 2 minutes. But this one was pretty thin. 1 minute I think will be sufficient. Plus there'll be some carryover cooking as this rests on the plate. So that was probably about 20 seconds of talking. I don't want to rush this step. If you end up pulling fish off the pan too soon, you cut into it and it's still a little raw in the center, all you need to do is put it right back on the pan, skin side up, so that you're preserving the crispiness of it. And then it'll kind of finish cooking through, even just from the residual heat of a pan. So don't ever be afraid to have a little redo and put it back onto the heat. Let me grab a plate here so that I can transfer this. This smells so good. So clarified butter, if you've never cooked with it before, it doesn't taste neutral. It kind of has a slightly buttery flavor, but it smells really good and does give a little hint of butteriness to anything that you're cooking with. So it's a great fat option for you. All right, this should be, see, nothing stuck. There's like nothing left on the pan here. This is, dare I say, the perfect fillet. If you can see that. I know on the internet they do that thing where they like, I don't know if you can hear it with the microphone, probably not, but it's making like a little crispy noise when I run the metal against the skin. It's looking so good. I'm just gonna set this aside for now to sort of finish a little bit, because we have more things to do. I forget what I was just saying about pans, maybe. I don't know if I answered your question, but any other questions while I'm just getting set up for scallops?
That's it for now. Thanks so much, Kat.
Okay.
Oh, actually, one just came up. Why is it important to wait until the pan is hot to add in oil or butter?
I am not 100% sure. I know that different pans react differently to like they bond differently with fat when it gets into the pan. And it's just something that I've always done, and it's never never steered me wrong, I guess. That's not the idiom I'm looking for, but it's always been the right thing to do for me. It might actually not be that important. There are things that I'm sure that someone has a different opinion on. You can preheat, but you definitely want to preheat the oil before you put anything into the oil. The one reason why I like to do it is I do like to adjust for the heat so that especially if I'm working with something like butter, not for searing, for instance, but if I want to make a brown butter sauce in a pan, I want the butter to heat up without burning, and just preheating the pan before adding the butter to it gives me a little bit of extra time. I feel like I'm giving a very complicated answer, but I think either way, you're fine. It's just something that I do. Okay.
Great. And then are we able to see the other side of the salmon?
Oh, of course. Let me show you what it looks like. So the other side is going to have a little bit of a sear on it, but it's not going to be crispy like this side where it's like this delicious bubbling of the skin. And that's because it's lean. The fats are mostly in the skin. That's where I'm expecting to see crisp. Here you might just notice like a little bit of like a sear. It's harder to tell on something like salmon because it's pink, but if this were a fillet of Pacific halibut, you would see like a very distinct golden color to this because it's a white fillet, but this just kind of looks like a little orangey. So yeah, but there's the crispy side that is the most important side. So let me just wipe this.
Amazing. And any thoughts on using coconut oil?
Coconut oil, if you're using refined coconut oil, that is the way to go. If you're using unrefined coconut oil, it's going to have a much lower smoking temperature. I forget what the exact smoke point is for refined coconut oil, but you'll want to double check that. I think for medium high heat, it's okay. I was looking at this last week preparing for this because I figured it was going to be a question. But there's like a brand called ThermoWorks that has a pretty good chart of what the smoke point is for different oils. And I know they had like a comprehensive list. Actually, my jar of clarified butter says that it's a 485 smoke point. So that's going to be perfect for scallops. I think coconut oil is not going to be something you want to cook scallops in because it will burn. And if you're not sure what that looks like, it just looks like burning is happening in the pan. So it'll be very obvious. Actually, let me give this a quick wipe before I add scallops in here. I used to use canola oil, and I realized that it was burning when I was trying to do scallops with it. I thought that it would be good enough for scallops because it was good enough for salmon, and it was not the case. So I just recently switched over. Some of you probably already knew not to sear in coconut oil, but apparently I did not. So let me get my pan hot here. On the induction burner, the temperature that I'm using is 460 degrees, like 450 or 460. So that's super, super hot. On your stovetop, depending on what your stovetop is like, it's probably cranked up all the way. The commercial kitchens have super hot burners, and that's why they can get a really good sear because all of the moisture from the scallops pretty much evaporates immediately. While that's heating up, I'm not sure if you'll be able to see, but there's some like droplets on here. That's the moisture that's getting pulled to the surface from the salt. And I can feel it. It's like these scallops feel nice and damp right now. So all I'm going to do is pat them dry again. And there's probably no need to season these because the salt is still sort of sticking to them. And they've been flavored just a little bit as they'd be sitting here. So I want to make sure these are super dry. The next thing that I like to do With the scallops, it's sort of hard to know which side is up, but you'll see that they do have a grain to them. Like this one kind of has these stripes. I try to make sure to find like a flat side. You might have to like manipulate them a little bit, but the flat side is the side that looks really pretty once it's seared. It's not going to affect how delicious this is. It's just being a little more perfect when you're cooking these. So let me add this clarified butter to the pan. I just wiped this out beforehand because there's some oils from the salmon skin in here. Some of those are probably still in here. You might see a little more smoke than normal, but ideally you're using a clean pan for this. When I'm adding these to the pan, I try to make sure that I put them in like a circular motion so that I remember which ones are first. So that is going in first. That'll be the first one that I flip. And you definitely want to make sure you're hearing a really nice sizzle when you put them into the oil. There'll be a little bit of flattering, so don't wear your finest clothes when you're doing this. I think I have just enough room to get these in. So it's really easy to sear a single scallop, but when you have this many, it's sort of like you kind of have to be a little more coordinated and make sure that you're flipping the first one first and the last one last, because even just 30 seconds can be the difference between a perfectly cooked scallop and one that's a little bit, a little bit too tough. So that's why I try to be really mindful of which one went in first. I will do that with fish too, if I'm putting 4 fillets into a pan, but it's especially important for this because there's really no going back once you move the scallop. This is also one of those situations where you just want to be patient. You want to wait for the scallops to do their thing. Trust that they will release themselves from the pan. Trust that they're going to get nice and golden. You'll start to see around the edges. I don't have a good camera angle for this, but when you're looking at a pan at home, you'll start to see around the edges that it'll start to look a little more cooked and a little browned. And that's sort of when you'll flip them. It'll take maybe, if you are using a timer, 2 or 3 minutes to do that. And then, from there, you're basically almost done cooking. So any questions while these are searing through?
Yes, one was, is olive oil okay for searing?
Olive oil, I would not sear with olive oil. If you are going to sear fish with olive oil, make sure you're using extra virgin olive oil because it has a higher smoke point. That can be okay for something that's medium to medium high heat, depending on the quality of the oil. So that's why I sort of recommend against it. I know that there are people who sear with olive oil for pretty much anything. And there are just a couple of different schools of thought around that. I personally avoid searing with olive oil because of just the variation in quality with affecting the smoke point. So.
Great. And then how long do you let the scallops sit with salt before actually cooking them?
I let them sit. I forget today. I probably let them sit for about 15 minutes. That's really all you need. 15 minutes. They'll start. You'll notice that they'll have some moisture on the surface. There's some moisture starting to pool in here, but it doesn't look like it's getting in the way. We'll see. 15 minutes is good. You don't need to leave it much longer than that. It's funny because Jay Kenji, I don't know how many of you read food blogs and stuff on the internet, but he also has a method for searing salmon where he salts the fish, lets it sit overnight, and then sears it the next day. Apparently that's foolproof, but I don't want to wait 8 hours to sear fish. So it's a similar method. This just happens so much more quickly with scallops. So
Awesome. And then the last question was, would you recommend 450 degrees throughout the entire sear?
for scallops, yes. For
Great.
salmon, I like to turn down the temperature as it cooks. It's not going to be at 450, but I start at medium high. I go to medium because it's so delicate. But with scallops, I like to keep it at this temperature. It should do the scallops pretty good. So these, I'm flipping now. I'm getting a nice little crust around the corners of the edges. And they're going to be so good. I'm just cooking them for like a minute on the other side. And that's really all they'll need. And this one's here, that's really nicely. I think I put this one in first. All right, so now that those are flipped, they're basically just like kissing the pan. I'm actually going to transfer these to a cutting board for first, because they're going to expel some liquid as they sit. And I kind of like for some of that to drain off first. You can put them onto like a brown paper bag, paper towel, whatever you like. All right. So there's gonna be, these are so sweet. So that you'll notice in the pan here, there's a lot of this, like a lot of sugars. Like if you were to eat that, it would just kind of taste like burnt sugar at this point. That wasn't the oil burning. Nothing was going wrong with the scallops. It's just like the natural sugars that are coming out of the like the juices of them, and it's super, super sweet. So that is very much to be expected. It'll come off really easily, don't worry. I'm just gonna throw this into my sink here. And so the reason I put these on a cutting board is you'll see they're kind of juicy. A lot of these juices are here. Just if you're trying to do a really nice plating, it's good to wait a second so that they get to do their thing. And then let's just use my hands here. So that's like my favorite seared scallop, I think, of the bunch. They're not all going to be perfect, but they're all going to be delicious. Just like that. So I can probably eat these all within like 5 minutes. I think they're really good just like this. If you wanted to do something a little special, this is like a little bonus here. I'm going to throw in this skillet and melt some compound butter. Actually, I'll find the link for this in just a moment, but this is basically butter that's been combined with some herbs. There's some shallot in here, a little bit of lemon juice, and I keep it in my freezer. Basically, it's just really flavorful butter that you roll into a log and then it's ready to go. You can spoon it over anything, fish, vegetables, scallops, etc. So once this gets a little hot, well, let's let them melt gently in here. I'll use that to pour over something here just to keep things interesting. In the meantime, let's take a bite. This is perfectly plump and should be a little bit opaque or a little bit translucent in the center. Not sure if you'll be able to see it if I cut this open, but let me get this melted here. Yeah, it's hard to see here because my camera is just over a zoom feed, but they're not totally cooked through. It's sort of like a medium rare temperature. That's the perfect temperature for this. Okay, now I've got some melted butter. Could be totally unnecessary because these scallops are so good, but I think it's nice to have options, mix up the flavors a little bit. What I can do is just a little bit of a drizzle over the top. Maybe some fresh pepper. And then I've got a really deluxe meal. If I had some fresh herbs, this would be the perfect time to throw those on top. And let me just taste it with the butter here. Yummy. If you want to switch over to the other camera, I'll show you how delicious the salmon is flaking. And you can just watch me chew for a minute. All right, the salmon's been sitting here. I probably wouldn't have waited so long to eat this, but you know, we're cooking multiple things today, but the fish flakes off really easily. There's that perfect little triangle. You'll see it's cooked. Oops, there we go. Cooked just through, it shouldn't be dry. Perfect. You know, I could also pour some butter over here if I felt like it, but I'm going to keep it as is because I like to keep the skin nice and crispy. If you don't like eating fish skin, you know, you can still sear this way. Definitely leave the skin on while you're searing because it'll keep it sort of basted in its own fats. It'll keep it really moist. You can always just peel it off. It comes off super easily. Oh, well, now that I'm saying it comes off super easily, it's kind of resisting, but just comes off like that. I love eating it. So, you know, totally up to you what you want to do with that. Any questions while I'm chewing?
Everything looks amazing. I'd love to eat those scallops. How long was the initial sear that you did on the scallops?
The scallops, I didn't time it, but it probably was 2 to 3 minutes. And then, you know, once you flip that first one, you'll see if it's about ready. You're going to look for this, you know, golden color around the edges. Depending on the shape of the scallop, sometimes it can get like really good skin contact with the pan, and it'll have like a nice brown crown all around. But usually they'll like pull away a little bit, but you want that golden color. That's what you're looking for. Expect to see that around 2 or 3 minutes, depending on how hot your pan is, how big the scallops are, how well you've patted them dry, etc.
Amazing. And then the light brown flesh under the skin, should that be removed?
Under the skin of the salmon. So are you
Right.
talking about this right here? If that's what you're talking about, no, eat it. It's delicious. It's just another part of the fillet. It doesn't taste, there's nothing wrong with it. It doesn't taste any different than the rest of the fish. I mean, it'll taste different than the skin, but it tastes just like the fillet. It's a good question though, because people do see that and think, you know, maybe it's something that needs to be removed. It absolutely does not. Another thing that you might notice, since I'm holding a piece of fish here, is some white stuff coming out of the fillets when you're searing it, when you're baking, broiling. That is also totally normal. Doesn't taste like anything. It just tastes like salmon. It's basically a protein called albumin. It's in halibut, cod, other protein sources, but you just notice it more in salmon because it's a pink fish. It comes out as it's cooking, especially if you're using higher heat cooking methods like searing. Essentially, it's just moisture and the protein structures squeezing out some of the moistures of the fillet. So yeah, eat it all, especially the skin. If you don't think you like skin, try making crispy skin and you might change your mind. So.
Perfect. Those are all the questions for now.
I do see one in the chat about the scallops. I don't know if you'd asked the initial question, Sharon, but on the other side of the scallop, once it's been flipped, depending on how big they are, they might just need another minute or 2 at the most. For today, all I did, because, you know, I was going around in that circle, it was maybe 30 seconds at the most. You know, there is carryover cooking, especially if you're using a very hot pan. It's basically, you're just wanting to kiss the other side of the scallops with some heat. You're doing most of the cooking on the first side. You don't need to sear both sides of the scallops. It's going to be way overcooked if you do that. You just want the nice crust on top. That's going to give you the texture. The bottom is just to cook through that other side. So yeah, I would say no more than 2 minutes, probably less than that. All right. Well, if we don't have any more questions, thanks for hanging out with me. I have a couple things I want to mention. Again, Weathervane Scallops are an exclusive member special available right now for a limited time. Maybe they'll sell out. They have in the past, so don't sleep on this special, especially if you like scallops. You will absolutely adore these. And I showed you the sugars in the pan. That's how sweet they are. They're just so sweet, buttery, all natural, just the best. So that's one of my favorite member specials as well. So if you're not a member though, you can sign up to become a member. We've got a special offer for you. You can use the code LIVE25, that's LIVE 25, and get $25 off your first box of fish from Wild Alaskan Company. There's a couple links and codes for that in the chat. Then you can have access to exclusive member specials like Weathervane Scallops, all the things that we feature on this fun cooking show we do every week. And otherwise, either way, member or not, join me next week, same time, same place. We'll be making a couple of 15-minute seafood appetizers. So just really quick ideas that are perfect for the upcoming holiday season. They're fast, easy, but really over the top because they're wild caught seafood. So it's a great way to share the good stuff with your friends, loved ones, coworkers, whoever, yourself, treat yourself. So hope to see you there. It'll be I don't think it'll be 45 minutes next time. It'll just be super fast and delicious. So yeah, hope to see you there. Live wild. Thanks for coming.